Hi, I'm Sharon Mujica, and I was the director of the Latin American Film Festival from 1986 to 2009, and I'm just here today to give you all some of the history of the festival and to welcome you to our 25th anniversary, which is very, very exciting. So I'm going to kind of go back in time and talk about when I left Mexico City in 1985 to come to Chapel Hill to take a job at UNC. I started out thinking about how we could incorporate more of Latin America into the curriculum. We had marvelous professors who were experts in their fields, great classes. At that time there was a lot of interest in Central America because of the wars in Nicaragua and El Salvador, so we had community people who wanted to know more but had not been able to travel there. And then there were very few study abroad programs in Latin America for the students at UNC. And you know, having moved just from Mexico after living there for 20 years, I was very surprised at how far away Latin America seemed to be for most Americans. There was just like this big void. After all, at that time there were few Latinos in North Carolina. There was no Latino grocery store. I think we had like two what I call pseudo-Mexican restaurants that didn't even serve food with cilantro. And nobody knew who Frida Kahlo was. So I thought, well, one way we could bring Latin America, the culture and history and the people of Latin America closer to the universities was through film. So I got the okay from our director at that time, Lars Schultz, who got up some money for the project, and we started the first festival in 1986. We showed 3 films, one from Brazil, Mexico, and Cuba. And then I like to give some little anecdotes. So our 4th film, which was the very acclaimed film from Peru called La Ciudad y los Perros, The City and the Dogs, was to be shown at the Carolina Theater at 11 o'clock at night. We did a lot of publicity, we promised a big party, and everything was set, and then we had no film. And what happened was that the film was sent from Miami by New Yorker Films, the distribution company, and arrived in the Chapel Hill bus station, and by the time we got down there to pick it up, it had been stolen. I mean, can you imagine stealing a 35mm film out of the bus station in Chapel Hill? But that's what happened. We were in a panic because we didn't have the money to pay for it, but fortunately the people in Miami who had not insured it ended up paying for it. So that was one of our first experiences in putting on a film festival. The next year, we invited, through some special monies we received, a filmmaker from Mexico, a really good friend of mine, Marcela Fernandez Violante. And it was the month of February, so what did it do? It snowed all up and down the East Coast, and she could never make it. Well, we showed the films anyway. The idea was that she come to explain her work, talk about her work, and show the rest of the films. And that didn't work, but the next year she did come, and we had it in November, and from then on the festival was in November. There are just so many memories of the festival in the first years, and one thing I kind of want to go back to is that all we had to work with was 16mm and 35mm, and there was no place on the university campus to show 35mm at that time. So this was a really big challenge. And when we got VHSs, we were thrilled, because that meant that we could show many more films. We could easily get them from the countries of Latin America, and it just opened a huge resource for us. It also made other problems, because we would find that we would be sent a tape and it would be in the system called PAL, and it would have to be converted very quickly into the system that worked in North America. And that was another sort of challenge or desafío for us. Sometimes it would work in the equipment that we had at Chapel Hill, and sometimes it wouldn't work in the equipment we had, for example, at Duke. So there continued to be situations such as that. Eventually when we got DVDs, well, that became a lot easier. But even in the beginning, the DVDs were pretty iffish. We moved the festival to include Duke in 1990, and so then I think we had maybe 4 at Duke and 4 at UNC, and that was a great addition. And then about 2 years later, we started including other universities, and that's when we moved to NC State, of course Duke and Chapel Hill, Guilford, and NC Central. And the festival stayed on those campuses for quite a while. But it really became so popular with people all over the state that we decided eventually, because of their request, to include 16 campuses in North Carolina So eventually the festival was shown at the ones I just mentioned, as well as UNC Greensboro, which is still in the festival, A&T University, Johnson C. Smith, Davidson, UNC Charlotte, and I hope I haven't left anybody out, also for a while at Wingate. So what happened was, the way I structured it was to have people from each campus on the film festival committee. And we would meet from all over. They would come to Chapel Hill or to Duke, and we would decide which films we were going to show, great discussions on that, and then trying to get them as well. And then those people, the representatives, who were often faculty members usually, were in charge of the logistics at each campus. But still, there were lots of things that would go on, for example, trying to get a film director, because through the years we did invite many film directors, and fortunately a lot of them were able to come. Some that I remember were, well, of course, Humberto Solás was one of the highlights of my whole career with the film festival, who's a very internationally acclaimed filmmaker from Cuba. And he came at one point when he was able to get a visa. We did have a lot of problems with the Cubans being able to get visas through the years, but we were often able to get the films out of Cuba. In fact, another anecdote was when we were going to show films and the filmmaker was not given a visa, so he sent the films through strangers on a plane. He went out to the airport and gave the films to strangers on a plane that was arriving in Miami, and then those strangers that turned out to be Canadians, who I had many conversations with afterwards, sent the films to me. So there were always things like that happening, and I think they probably still happen today. It's a rather complicated way to do things. I think one of the most valuable things that we could do was that we brought people in, we brought the community into the universities, and we took the universities out into the community. And that was something that I think, as far as outreach, was one of the most important things that we could have done during those years. We added music to the festival. We had a lot of performances. We had them before, sometimes we had them after. We had a dance one year. We did a festival on gay life and film, where we brought filmmakers from New York and so forth who were working in that media. And that was one of the first things that was done many, many years ago, before it was quite so, I guess, mainstream as it is today. We brought indigenous filmmakers from their countries in Latin America. They had been given monies by organizations to film in their own communities, and we brought them up for many wonderful evenings. So we would usually have a theme, and that's still true today, that we would center around the festival, and that would be what we would focus on that year. We have lots of other filmmakers. I've just mentioned a few. We had Humberto Solás, we had Marcela Fernandez Violante, of course, about 3 times. We had Carlos Gavidia came, the Colombian filmmaker. We had Antonio Scarmata, who came one year, the writer, who did El Postino. But we showed one of his films before he became so famous. We had other documentary filmmakers, one of them who's coming this year, Cy Landau. We had Les Blanc. And then also we had a lot of our own talent here in the Triangle, such as Joanne Hirschfield and Penny Simpson's first film about Latinos in North Carolina. And then our, Rodrigo Dorfman's work, Charlie Thompson's work, and then most recently, Altha Cravey and Elva Bishop's work. And that was a very exciting change when we could actually get filmmakers from here. We often had the estrenos of films, the first time they had been shown. And one really interesting one was when we showed Frida, that was made by, the first Frida made by Paul Leduc, a Mexican director. And we got the film before it went to New York. And we showed it in Chapel Hill, and the film burned. 2 of the frames were burned. So we had to quickly get it spliced together before it was sent for its actual first showing in New York City. Fortunately, nobody noticed. That was another one of those scary moments that, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So we had that, and we just had a terrific time during all these years, and it's been wonderful to work with all the people. It's also been exciting to have the audiences that we have been able to have. My idea of the festival, with a different film every night on a different campus, was that people would travel around to see the films, and actually many people did. And it got to be like this community during the month of November where people would come to the festival and it was like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you for a whole year, but here you are. And afterwards there would be discussions, and of course the filmmakers visited classrooms and community events and so forth. So we tried to use their expertise to spread more information about the countries where they were coming from, as well as their work in the arts. So I think all in all, it's been a great ride. It's been a great adventure. I had 24 years actually of a wonderful adventure working for the Consortium in Latin American Studies, Latin American and Caribbean Studies at Duke and UNC. And fortunately for everybody here today, the festival just continues. So we're looking forward to this year's great selections. Thank you so much.